Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku controlled the anti-life equation instead of Darkseid. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. Kamino Ward, a name already synonymous with cataclysm, was being unmade. The ground, a jagged mosaic of shattered asphalt and twisted rebar, groaned under the relentless assault of Tamura Shigaraki. He was no longer just a man with a destructive quirk, he was a walking, shrieking epicenter of oblivion. His decay, amplified to a terrifying degree by All for One's machinations, no longer needed his touch. It radiated from him in waves, a great tide of entropy that turned skyscrapers into sand and heroes' hopes into dust. Izuku Deku Midoriya felt the end in the marrow of his bones. Every muscle fiber screamed in protest, every joint ached with the strain of holding one for all at a sustained 45%. Green lightning, once a vibrant symbol of hope, now felt like a desperate flickering candle in a hurricane. He moved in a blur, a frantic dance between offense and rescue. One moment, he was launching a Delaware smash at a hulking Nomu, the impact sending shockwaves through the ruined cityscape. The next, he was using Black Whip to snatch a family of 3 from a collapsing overpass, the inky tendrils straining under the weight. Hawk's status on the east flank. Endeavor's voice, a roar of guttural flame, cut through the din over the comms. The number one hero was a raging inferno, his hell flame incinerating waves of lesser villains, but even he was being pushed back. Pinned down, came the strained reply from the winged hero. Too many of them. Shigaraki's lieutenants are coordinating the attack. This isn't chaos, Endeavor, it's a hunt. Deku gritted his teeth, launching himself over a chasm that had been a bustling street moments before. He saw it all in flashes of lightning-fast perception. Mirko, her prosthetic leg sparking, fighting with the ferocity of a cornered animal. Ryukyu, in her massive dragon form, shielding a group of heroes from a decay wave that bleached the very air it passed through. Bakugo, a constant explosion of fury and light, his AP shots carving paths through the villainous horde, his shouts a mix of rage and desperate encouragement. But their focus, their terror, was all centered on the figure standing atop the ruins of a broadcast tower. Shigaraki. His white hair whipped around him like a specter's shroud. His body was a roadmap of surgical scars and raw power. He wasn't just destroying. He was enjoying it, a manic, broken grin plastered on his face. It's all so fragile. Shigaraki shrieked, his voice amplified by some unseen quirk, echoing across the battlefield. All of it. Your buildings, your rules, your hope. Just one little push and it all turns to dust. Why do you keep rebuilding it? He raised his hand, and the decay intensified. But this time, something was different. The power wasn't just spreading outwards, it was pulling inwards, focusing on a point just above his palm. The air began to shimmer, to warp. A sound that wasn't a sound filled their ears, the screech of reality being peeled back. What is he doing? Deku murmured, his danger sense screaming, a blinding spike of pain behind his eyes unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't warning him of an attack, it was warning him that the fundamental laws of his world were about to break. The vestiges of One for All roared in his mind. Ninth, get away from there. Nana Shimura's voice was frantic. This isn't a quirk. It's something else. He's tearing at the seams. Shigaraki laughed, a horrible, broken sound. Let's see what happens when it all breaks. With a final, guttural cry, he clenched his fist. The air before him shattered. It was not an explosion. It was a violation. A rip appeared in the sky, a jagged, bleeding wound in the fabric of space. It bled colors that had no name, churning with sickly purples and cancerous greens. From it, a profound wrongness leaked into the world, a pressure that made lungs burn and minds reel. The battle below faltered, heroes and villains alike staring up at the impossible sight, their localized war suddenly rendered meaningless in the face of a torn heaven. But then, the violation was itself violated. From the deepest heart of Shigaraki's chaotic rift, a second portal tore its way into existence. This one was different. It was precise, geometric, a perfect circle of swirling red and black energy that pulsed with a low, gut-thrumming boom. 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 The sound was ancient, powerful, and filled with a dread that dwarfed even Shigaraki's nihilism. From this new portal, this boom tube, a figure was violently ejected, crashing to the ground with the force of a meteor. The impact carved a 50-foot crater, sending debris flying. Deku, using float, hovered at the edge of the crater, his eyes wide with disbelief. The being at the bottom was magnificent and broken. He was a giant, clad in armor that seemed forged from starlight and circuitry, now cracked and shattered. Golden ichor, thick as mercury, leaked from a dozen wounds. A helmet, shaped like a celestial crown, was half sheared away, revealing a face with noble, chiseled features, now contorted in agony. He pushed himself to one knee, a staff of pulsating blue light flickering in his grasp. "He comes?" The being rasped, his voice a chorus of harmonious tones, now discordant with pain. The tiger force at the core of all things. The god of tyranny. As if summoned by his words, two crimson beams of light erupted from the boom tube. They did not travel in straight lines. They twisted, turned, and zigzagged through the air with impossible, sentient agility, homing in on the fallen god. One beam struck the ruins of a skyscraper. The building didn't explode or crumble. It simply ceased to be. One moment, a 50-story skeleton of steel and concrete stood against the sky. The next, there was nothing, not even dust. The Omega beams. What in the hell is that? Bakugo yelled, landing beside Deku, his gauntlets smoking. Another one of his tricks? No, Deku said, his voice barely a whisper. This is something else. Something older. The fallen god, seeing the beams closing in, looked across the battlefield. His gaze swept past the cowering villains, past the hardened pro-heroes. His ancient eyes, filled with the light of dying galaxies, settled on Deku. And in that instant, Deku felt as if his very soul was being laid bare. The being, this new god, didn't just see a boy in a tattered green costume. Deku could feel his perception, a strange, intrusive sensation. He saw the blazing star of One for All, a legacy of hope passed down through generations. He saw the 9 distinct wills within, a chain of sacrifice. But most importantly, he saw Izuku Midoriya's core, an unwavering, almost pathological need to save everyone, a will so pure and so powerful it burned like a white-hot sun against the backdrop of destruction. A will to create and preserve in a world being unmade. A flicker of something, desperation, inspiration, or perhaps madness, flashed in the new god's eyes. The Omega beams were seconds away. "You!" the god wheezed, stumbling toward Deku. "Your will, it burns so bright. A will to create? To protect?" He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small, black cube, no bigger than his palm. It hummed with a palpable coldness, its surface shifting with complex, living patterns. A mother box. "It must be you. You are the only vessel strong enough to contain it, not just wield it." He lunged forward, covering the remaining distance with the last of his cosmic strength. Deku, stunned, didn't have time to react. The new god shoved the cold, humming cube against his chest. "Forgive me, child," he whispered, his voice filled with an eternity of regret. The cube didn't hit Deku. It phased through him. The sensation was indescribable. First, a flash of absolute cold, as if he'd been submerged in liquid nitrogen. Then, a searing fire that traced every nerve ending in his body. His mind, his very consciousness, was flooded. He heard a billion voices screaming in unison, a chorus of despair from conquered worlds. He felt the crushing weight of utter futility, the cold, mathematical certainty that free will was a statistical error, that hope was a lie, that life itself was a chaotic anomaly in a universe that craved silent, ordered non-existence. It was a formula. A philosophical weapon. An equation that, once solved, proved that life was meaningless. Loneliness, alienation, fear, despair, self-worth, divided by mockery, divided by condemnation, divided by misunderstanding, x guilt, x shame, x failure, x judgment. N equals y, where y equals hope and n equals folly. Love equals lies. Life equals death. Self equals Darkseid. The anti-life equation. It slammed into the core of One for All, a wave of absolute nothingness against the fortress of generational hope. The vestiges shrieked in unison, their light dimming under the oppressive, psychic weight. For a terrifying second, Deku's green lightning turned a sickly, necrotic gray. He felt his own will, his own identity, start to dissolve, to be overwritten by the equation's terrible, simple truth. But the new god had been right. Deku's will, forged in the fires of bullying and powerlessness, reinforced by the unwavering belief of all might, and honed by countless battles, did not break. It held. It became a container, a prison wall of pure hope built around an idea of absolute despair. The equation settled, not conquering him, but integrating, becoming a dark, silent passenger coiled around his soul. Then, the Omega beams arrived. They struck Deku square in the chest, precisely where the mother box had entered. This was the end. The power that could erase gods, that could unmake reality, had found its target, and nothing happened. The crimson energy, pregnant with oblivion, touched Deku's skin and fizzled out like static. The anti-life equation, now bound to him, recognized the energy of its master. It protected its new host. It declared him off limits. From the swirling chaos of the boom tube, a presence made itself known. Deku couldn't see it clearly, just an immense, monolithic silhouette against the burning red of the portal, a shape of pure, immovable tyranny. Two crimson eyes, glowing like embers of hate, stared out across the dimensional divide, locking onto Deku. A voice, low and terrible, echoed not in the air, but directly in the minds of everyone on the battlefield. It was a voice of grinding mountains and collapsing stars. So, it has found a new home. The presence lingered for a moment longer, a gaze that promised subjugation on a scale they could not comprehend. Then, with a violent implosion of sound and light, the boom tube snapped shut. Shigaraki's rift, its anchor point gone, collapsed in on itself, sealing the sky with a final, thunderous crack. Silence. The battlefield, which moments ago had been a cacophony of war, was now utterly, eerily still. The villains, their leader unconscious from the psychic backlash, were broken and terrified. The heroes stood, staring at Deku, then at the empty sky, their minds struggling to process the cosmic horror they had just witnessed. Deku himself swayed on his feet, his mind a maelstrom. He felt hollow. The burning fire of One for All was still there, but now it surrounded a core of absolute zero. He felt the equation inside him, a cold, clear certainty whispering truths he never wanted to know. It wasn't a voice. It was a state of being, an awareness of the futility in every beating heart, the lie in every smile. The battle was over. The immediate threat of Shigaraki was neutralized. But a cold, quiet dread was beginning to settle over Deku, a dread far worse than any physical threat. The silence was broken by a scream. About 100 yards away, a teetering section of a skyscraper, damaged in the initial fighting, finally gave way. A massive slab of concrete and steel peeled away from the structure, beginning its slow, deadly plummet to the street below. Directly underneath it, a young woman, a civilian who had been hiding in the rubble, was trying to pull her leg free from a piece of debris. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She screamed again, a raw, primal sound of imminent death. Deku's body moved before his mind could catch up. His heroic instincts, the very core of his being, took over. He wasn't thinking about the new god, the portal, or the cold thing nestled in his soul. He saw someone in danger, and he had to save them. He couldn't reach her in time. Not even with 45%. The slab was too big, too close. He needed her to stop panicking, to stay still so he could find a way to divert the debris. Without thinking, without choosing his words, he projected his voice, infused with a desperate, heroic urgency. "Stop!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. He needed to reassure her, to quell her fear. He poured his desire for her safety into his next words. "It's okay. Be calm." The effect was instantaneous. And it was horrifying. The young woman didn't just listen. She didn't just calm down. Her will was unwritten. Her frantic struggles ceased instantly. Her scream died in her throat, cut off mid-syllable. The terror in her eyes didn't fade. It was extinguished, like a snuffed flame. Her face went slack, her body rigid. Her eyes, which had been wide with fear, glazed over, becoming dull, placid orbs staring into nothing. She stopped pulling at her trapped leg. She simply stood there, perfectly, unnaturally still, as the shadow of the falling slab engulfed her. A cold power washed through Deku, an echo of his own command returning to him. He felt her fear being erased, her free will being overridden by his command. He had told her to be calm, and the universe, through him, had complied, stripping her of everything else to fulfill that single, simple instruction. The other heroes were frozen, watching the scene unfold, too far to help. But Deku wasn't. The horror of what he had just done jolted him. This wasn't salvation. This was violation. With a roar that was more anguish than effort, he pushed one for all to a place it had never been. 60%. Pain lanced up his limbs, but he ignored it. Black whip tendrils, thick as pythons, erupted from his arms. They weren't just fast, they were immediate. They latched onto the falling slab of concrete, and with a scream of tearing metal and tortured muscles, Deku pulled. He didn't stop it. He redirected it. He swung the multi-ton piece of debris like a wrecking ball, slamming it into the base of another ruined building. The crash was deafening, sending up a plume of dust that obscured the sky. Panting, his body screaming, Deku looked back at the woman. She was safe. The space where she stood was now clear. But she hadn't moved. She remained in the exact same position, her expression one of perfect, mindless serenity. Endeavor landed beside her, his flames dying down as he cautiously approached. "Hey, miss? Are you all right?" The woman didn't respond. She didn't even blink. She just stood there. Calm. Deku felt a cold dread, colder and more profound than the equation itself, wash over him. He looked down at his hands, the source of a power that could save the world, the vessels of one for all's sacred trust. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of his power failing. He was terrified of it succeeding. He had saved a life. But he was horribly, sickeningly certain that he had just destroyed a person. The echo of his own words, "Be calm," reverberated in the hollow space in his soul, a chilling whisper of the god he had just become. The first thing Izuku Midoriya registered was the smell. It was a sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic that clung to the air, a stark contrast to the thick, coppery smell of blood and the gritty taste of dust that had been his reality for what felt like an eternity. The second was the rhythmic, metronomic beep of a heart monitor, a sound that was supposed to be reassuring but instead felt like a ticking clock, counting down to the next time he would have to face the world. He kept his eyes closed. To open them would be to acknowledge that the battle was over, that the rift in the sky was gone, and that he was back in a world he was now terrified to be a part of. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he could still see her face. The woman in the dust. He could see the terror in her eyes being snuffed out like a candle flame, replaced by that awful, placid calm. He hadn't just saved her from being crushed, he had crushed something inside her first. The equation hummed within him, a low-frequency vibration at the base of his soul. It was no longer the screaming torrent it had been upon entry. Now, it was a quiet, settled thing, like a predator resting in the shade. It didn't need to roar. It was a fundamental truth, and truths did not need to be loud. It whispered to him without words, a constant, insidious stream of logic. She was afraid. Fear is suffering. You ended her suffering. It was a mercy. No, he whispered, his voice a dry, cracking sound in the quiet room. The heart monitor beside him skipped a beat, its rhythm faltering at his distress. "Young Midoriya? You're awake." The voice was Recovery Girl's, gentle and familiar. He forced his eyes open. He was in Yue's infirmary, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, painting stripes of light across the clean white sheets. The old hero was standing by his bed, her expression a mixture of relief and professional concern. "Don't try to talk too much. You push your body well past its limits." "Again," she said, her tone chiding but her eyes soft. "Severe muscle tearing in your arms and shoulders, chakra exhaustion. You gave us all quite a scare." He wanted to apologize. He wanted to explain. He wanted to scream. But the words caught in his throat, turning to ash on his tongue. What if he said "I'm sorry," and his intent, his overwhelming guilt, somehow forced her to forgive him? What if he commanded her to understand his pain and her face went as slack and empty as the woman's in the dust? He clamped his mouth shut, the muscles in his jaw aching. He gave her a weak, jerky nod instead. Recovery Girl frowned, noticing his reticence. "The villains have been apprehended." Shigaraki is in a specialized holding cell in Tartarus, comatose but secure. The battle is won, my boy. You can rest. Rest is a cessation of struggle, the equation murmured from its cold throne in his mind. Struggle is the foundation of free will. Therefore, rest is a step toward the ultimate peace. The peace I offer. A violent shudder racked his body. He squeezed his eyes shut again, fighting a wave of nausea. His friends tried to visit. The first was Uraraka, her footsteps soft in the hallway. He heard her ask Recovery Girl if he was awake. He held his breath, forcing his body to remain perfectly still, mimicking the shallow breathing of sleep. He couldn't face her. He couldn't risk looking into her bright, hopeful eyes and seeing them go dull because he wished she wouldn't worry so much. The thought was a physical pain, sharper than any broken bone. He heard her sigh, a sound of gentle disappointment, before her footsteps receded. The guilt was a stone in his stomach. Ida was next, his approach more formal and measured. He didn't even have to feign sleep. The sheer terror of what he might say to his earnest, rule-abiding friend was enough to keep him paralyzed in his bed. He pictured Ida, frozen mid-gesture, his passionate speeches about heroism replaced by a vacant stare, all because Deku might accidentally wish for him to just relax for a minute. He kept up the charade for 2 days, communicating only in nods, shakes of the head, and painstakingly written notes. He claimed his throat was too raw to speak from dust inhalation. It was a flimsy excuse, and he could see the doubt in Recovery Girl's eyes, but she didn't press him. By the time he was discharged to the Heights Alliance dorms, a new, heavy silence had become his shield and his prison. Walking into the common room was like stepping onto a battlefield of a different kind. It was loud, chaotic, and brimming with life, the very things he now feared. Kaminari and Siro were laughing boisterously over a video game. Mina was trying to teach Kirishima a new dance move, their energetic shouts filling the space. The air smelled of the popcorn Jiro was making in the kitchen. It was wonderful. It was home. And it was a minefield. Deku! You're back! Kirishima yelled, his sharp-toothed grin a beacon of uncomplicated friendship. The common room chatter died down as all eyes turned to him. A chorus of welcoming shouts and questions rose up. Are you okay? You were so manly out there. How are you feeling? Every question was a potential trigger. Every well-intentioned word demanded a response. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The equation inside him was impassive, but he could feel its potential, a coiled spring of power waiting for a single, stray thought. He gave them all a weak, tight-lipped smile and a quick wave, then practically fled, muttering a barely audible tired, need to rest, as he scurried towards the elevators. He locked the door to his all-might-themed room and sagged against it, his heart pounding. The colorful, smiling face of his mentor stared down at him from posters on every wall. It used to be a source of infinite inspiration. Now, it felt like an accusation. The symbol of peace inspires with words and deeds, he thought. What happens when my words are weapons? He spent the next few days as a ghost in his own life. He'd wake up before anyone else, get his food from the kitchen in silence, and retreat to his room. He'd attend classes, sitting in the back, never raising his hand, his gaze fixed on his notebook where he wrote nothing. At lunch, he'd find a secluded corner of the rooftop, forcing down his food before anyone could join him. He was isolating himself, and he knew it was hurting his friends, but the alternative was unthinkable. The fear was a living thing, a cold serpent coiled around his larynx. Every time he opened his mouth to speak, he could feel it tighten. One afternoon, he couldn't bear the suffocating silence of his room any longer. He forced himself to go to the cafeteria during a less busy period, hoping the ambient noise would be a shield. He sat alone at a corner table, pushing a bowl of katsudon around with his chopsticks. But he wasn't alone for long. A few of his classmates were there, Sato, Koda, and Shoji. A few tables over, members of Class 1B were having a loud, argumentative debate about a recent hero ethics assignment. The clatter of trays, the scrape of chairs, the overlapping chatter, it began to build. The sound scraped against his raw nerves. His senses, heightened by One for All, picked up every conversation, every laugh, every cough. It was a cacophony of disorganized life, of chaotic, uncoordinated free will. His head began to throb. The stress of the past few days, the lack of sleep, the constant, gnawing fear, it was all coming to a head. He just wanted a moment of peace. A single, solitary moment to think. The thought bloomed in his mind, not as a command, but as a desperate, frustrated wish. I wish everyone would just be quiet for 1 second. The change was not gradual. It was absolute. One moment, the cafeteria was filled with the mundane symphony of student life. The next, it was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound from the room. It wasn't just that people stopped talking. The loud scraping of a chair from the 1B table stopped mid-scrape. Sato, who had been lifting a piece of cake to his mouth, froze, his fork hovering inches from his lips. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed to die. Deku's head snapped up, his blood running cold. Everyone was frozen in place. Their eyes, which had been bright with conversation and life, were now unfocused, staring blankly at their food, at the walls, at nothing. A placid, unnatural stillness had descended upon them all. They weren't holding their breath. It was as if the very concept of making noise had been temporarily erased from their reality. The equation inside him offered a cool, logical approval. Order from chaos. Peace from noise. It is efficient. No, Deku gasped, the word tearing from his throat. He scrambled back from his table, his chair clattering to the floor. The sound was obscenely loud in the manufactured silence, but it seemed to break the spell. As if a switch had been flipped, sound rushed back into the room. The chair from 1B finished its scrape with a loud screech. Sato blinked and took a bite of his cake. The conversations resumed, a little disjointed, as if they'd all lost their train of thought for a split second. No one seemed to notice what had happened. They just shook their heads, a momentary lapse, a strange feeling of déjà vu, before continuing on. But Deku saw it. He had seen the blankness in their eyes. He had felt the power of his own will impose itself upon them. He fled the cafeteria, a strangled sob caught in his chest, ignoring the confused calls of his classmates. He didn't stop running until he was back in his room, the door slammed shut, his back pressed against it as if to keep the entire world out. He had controlled them. He had done it without a word, with a simple, fleeting thought. The power wasn't just in his voice. It was tied to his intent, his will, his deepest desires. He was a walking, breathing weapon of psychic domination, and he didn't even know when the trigger was pulled. He stayed in his room for the rest of the day and the next, ignoring the knocks on his door, the worried texts from his friends. He was a danger to them all. He needed to disappear. The knock that finally broke through his self-imposed exile was not gentle. It was a series of sharp, explosive raps that sounded less like a fist and more like a contained detonation. "Open the damn door, Deku! I know you're in there, Bakugo." Deku squeezed his eyes shut. Of all the people he didn't want to face, Kaken was at the top of the list. He stayed silent, hoping he would go away. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the distinct sound of a small, precise explosion, and the doorknob assembly on his door blasted inwards, clattering to the floor. The door swung open to reveal Katsuki Bakugo. His red eyes narrowed in a furious glare. "We're done with this moping bullshit," Bakugo growled, stepping into the room and kicking the door shut behind him. "You've been acting like a goddamn ghost for a week. Everyone's worried, and you're in here hiding under your all-might blankets like a damn kid. What the hell is wrong with you?" Deku scrambled back on his bed, pulling his knees to his chest. "Kaken, please, just go." His voice was hoarse, filled with a panic that only seemed to fuel Bakugo's anger. "Go? Hell no, I'm not going," he snapped, stalking closer. "I was there. I saw that thing in the sky. I saw that weird night-looking bastard and those laser beams. And I saw you, standing there when it was all over. Something happened to you. Something more than just a fight. So stop being a coward and spit it out." Deku shook his head frantically, pressing his lips together so hard they hurt. He couldn't tell him. If he tried to explain the equation, what it was, what it did, what if he accidentally made Bakugo believe it? The thought of that boundless, explosive ambition being snuffed out and replaced with nihilistic certainty was a horror beyond imagining. "There's nothing to tell," Deku mumbled, his voice tight. "Liar!" Bakugo roared, and he was suddenly right there, grabbing the front of Deku's shirt and hauling him off the bed. Look at me when I'm talking to you. You think you're the only one who fought? You think you're the only one carrying shit around? Whatever it is, you deal with it. You don't hide from it like a damn crybaby. The raw frustration, the fear, the helplessness, it all crested within Deku at once. Bakugo's anger wasn't helping. It was making it worse, pressing in on him, forcing him into a corner where his power festered. He didn't want to fight him. He didn't want to hurt him. He just wanted him to understand. The desperation was a physical thing, a clawing need for someone, anyone, to grasp the sheer scale of the cosmic horror he was living with. And in that moment of pure, desperate anguish, the thought took form, sharper and more focused than the wish in the cafeteria. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, aimed directly at the furious boy holding him. Just for 1 second, Kaken. I wish you'd understand what this feels like. The universe, bound by the equation that now lived in Deku's soul, obeyed. Bakugo's roar cut off instantly. His grip on Deku's shirt went slack. His body, a coiled spring of explosive power, went rigid. But this was not the placid emptiness of the others. This was something far, far worse. The fire in Bakugo's eyes didn't just die. It was consumed. Deku watched in absolute horror as a void opened up behind his rival's pupils. The fierce, competitive ambition, the burning desire to be number one that had defined Katsuki Bakugo since childhood. It was all stripped away in a nanosecond. He was granted a glimpse into the equation's truth. He saw his own life, his goals, his very existence, not through his own eyes, but through the cold, cosmic lens of the ALE. He saw his ambition for what the equation said it was, a meaningless twitch in a meaningless universe, the frantic scrabbling of an ant on a dust mote, bound for an inevitable, silent end. The concept of victory became a hollow, ridiculous sound. The title of number one hero became an absurdity. His expression, once twisted in rage, collapsed into a mask of sudden, profound, and utterly alien despair. It was the face of a man who had just stared into the heat death of the universe and seen his own reflection. His shoulders slumped. His hands fell to his sides. A single, guttural, soundless breath escaped his lips. He was hollowed out. Erased. The sight of it, the wrongness of it, shattered Deku's desperate plea. A horrified scream ripped from his own throat, a pure, instinctual rejection of what he had done. No! Kaken! His scream, his absolute horror and rejection of the power, acted like a circuit breaker. He recoiled his will, severing the psychic link with every ounce of strength he possessed. Color flooded back into Bakugo's face. The light, the familiar fire, flickered back into his eyes, confused and terrified. He stumbled backward, tripping over a stack of notebooks and crashing against the wall. He stared at Deku, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His hands were shaking. He didn't know what had just happened. There was no clear memory, no words he could use to define it. But the feeling remained, a metaphysical frostbite on his soul. He had just touched absolute zero. He had just stood on the edge of an abyss and felt its cold breath on his face. What? Bakugo stammered, his voice thin, stripped of its usual bravado. What did you do to me? For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo looked at Izuku Midoriya, and he was afraid. Not of his power, not of his strength, but of the abyss he had just seen swirling behind his friend's green eyes. Without another word, he scrambled to his feet, turned, and fled the room, leaving behind a shattered doorknob and a silence more profound than any before. Deku crumpled to the floor, uncontrollable sobs racking his entire body. He had done it. He had taken the most vibrant, willful, and relentlessly driven person he knew and had, for a single, eternal second, extinguished his soul. He couldn't do this. He couldn't live like this. He couldn't carry this alone. Scrambling for his phone, his fingers slick with tears, he found the number he was looking for. He didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to. The phone picked up on the second ring. Young Midoriya? Is everything all right? All Might's voice, warm and concerned, was the only anchor he had left in a world that was threatening to drown him. All Might, Deku choked out, the words tearing through him. Can you meet me? Please. I need help. Something is wrong. Something is so wrong. An hour later, Deku sat in All Might's office at UA. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room. He hadn't stopped shaking. Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, sat across from him, a steaming mug of tea untouched in his hands, his face etched with deepening concern. And Deku told him everything. The words came out in a torrent, a broken, sobbing confession. He told him about the rift, the dying new god, and the humming black cube that had phased into his chest. He described the feeling of the equation flooding his mind, the chorus of a billion screaming souls. He told him about the woman in the dust, her face forever seared into his memory. He told him about the cafeteria, and the horrifying, silent obedience. And then, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper, he told him what he had done to Kaken. He just looked at me, Deku wept, his face buried in his hands. And I just wanted him to understand. And the light in his eyes just went out, All Might. It just went out. He tried to explain the equation itself, the words of the formula feeling like poison on his tongue. Loneliness, alienation, fear. Self equals Darkseid. He couldn't finish it. He was sobbing too hard. Toshinori sat in stunned silence, his already pale face somehow growing paler. This was beyond his experience. This wasn't a quirk. This wasn't all for one. This was something ancient, cosmic, a philosophical plague that had taken root in his successor, the boy he saw as a son. For a moment, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fear crossed his face. He instinctively leaned back in his chair, a subconscious flinch away from the sheer wrongness of what he was hearing. But then he looked at the broken, terrified boy weeping in front of him. This was not a monster. This was his Izuku, his successor, suffering under a burden no one should ever have to bear. His fear was replaced by a surge of fierce, paternal protectiveness. He stood up, his joints creaking, and walked around the desk. He knelt in front of Deku, his bony hands surprisingly strong, as he gently pulled the boy's hands away from his face. Izuku, he said, his voice soft but firm, forcing the boy to look at him. Look at me. Deku's eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a despair so deep it made Toshinori's heart ache. I don't have the answers, All Might said, his voice raw with honesty. I have never heard of anything like this. It is a terrifying power, and you are right to be afraid of it. Deku flinched, about to retreat back into his shell of guilt. But Toshinori continued, his grip tightening slightly, a point of grounding in the boy's swirling chaos. You are not it. This equation, it is not you. What you did to young Bakugo, it terrified you. Your first instinct was to recoil, to reject it. That is what matters. Your heart, Izuku. Your heart is still your own. He pulled the trembling boy forward, wrapping his thin arms around him in a fierce hug. Deku clung to him, his sobs muffled against his mentor's shirt. You are not alone in this anymore, Toshinori whispered, his own eyes stinging. I don't know how, and I don't know what it will take. But we will face this. I promise you, my boy. We will face it together. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't an answer. But for the first time in a week, as Deku held onto his mentor, the cold, silent hum of the equation in his soul felt just a little bit more distant. He was not okay, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of something he thought the equation had permanently extinguished. He felt hope. Apocalypse does not have a sun. It has the fire pits. They are immense, continent-spanning chasms of eternal flame, roaring with a fury that is both industrial and infernal. Their light is a constant, unforgiving crimson glare that paints the brittlest architecture in shades of blood and rust. The air, thick with the stench of ozone, molten metal, and a less tangible but more pervasive odor of systemic despair, does not move in gentle breezes but in hot, cyclonic blasts from the planet's core. This is not a world that was born. It was forged, beaten into submission, its every feature a testament to the indomitable, tyrannical will of its god. In the heart of this world, within the colossal, jagged fortress that pierced the smog-choked sky, sat Darkseid. He was not merely on his throne, he was the throne room. The chamber was an extension of his being, a cavernous, echoing space of polished black stone that seemed to absorb all light and hope. The throne itself was a monolithic seat of jagged angles and oppressive scale, making even the god who sat upon it seem a part of some grand, unmovable geology. But Darkseid was not unmovable. He was a being of terrible, focused stillness, the calm at the center of a galactic storm of his own creation. His granite-gray skin seemed to drink in the hellish light of the fire pits, and his eyes, two burning coals of cosmic rage, stared into the middle distance, seeing far beyond the walls of his palace, beyond the screaming skies of his world. He was looking across dimensions, across the bleeding wound in reality that had so recently healed, focusing on a single, insignificant planet. Earth. The fury he felt was a cold, compressed thing. It was not the hot, explosive rage of a mortal warlord. It was the vast, patient anger of a fundamental constant whose calculations had been disrupted. For millennia, he had sought the anti-life equation. He had conquered galaxies, extinguished civilizations, and interrogated the very fabric of reality to find the final, beautiful proof of his own philosophy, that free will is a flaw, a chaotic disease, and that the only true peace, the only true purpose, is submission to his will. Self equals Darkseid. He had been so close. The fragments, collected from the minds of dying gods and the ruins of forgotten universes, had been unified. The final cipher was within his grasp. And then, his prey, the sniveling new god Oriolon, had fled through a tear in reality created by a primitive's uncontrolled power. A chaotic, random event. Darkseid despised chaos. He had fired his Omega beams, the ultimate expression of his divine will, the power to erase beings from existence. It was a certainty. A conclusion. But it had failed. The beams had touched their target, not Oriolon, but the new host, and had dissipated, neutralized by the very prize they were meant to reclaim. The equation had found a home. This, in itself, was not the source of his fury. The equation required a host, a voice through which its truth could be spoken. He had always intended to integrate it more fully with himself, but a temporary vessel was a logical step. No, the source of his fury was the nature of the vessel. With his cosmic senses, he could feel his equation, a part of his very being, now coiled in the soul of another. He could feel its state, its environment. It was like feeling a limb of his own body submerged in an alien, hostile element. The equation was not resonating with the host's will. It was being actively contained by it. Imprisoned, he focused his gaze, his mind sifting through the psychic residue of the encounter. He saw the boy. A child, barely more than a fledgling, clad in a ridiculous green costume. But as he looked deeper, past the surface, he saw the power within him. It was a strange, layered energy, a collection of wills, a legacy of defiance passed down like a torch. It burned with a disgustingly bright, chaotic light. A light he had seen before countless times, on countless worlds, always moments before he extinguished it. The light of hope. Hope. The most persistent and irritating of all chaotic variables. The belief that the next moment could be different, better. The ultimate denial of the inevitable. The anti-life equation was the mathematical certainty of despair. This boy, this Izuku Midoriya, was its conceptual opposite. A living, breathing vessel of irrational, defiant hope. The dying Oriolon, in a final, foolish act of defiance, had not just hidden the equation. He had placed it in a paradoxical prison, a cage made of the very idea it was meant to destroy. This was the source of his intrigue. The equation should have scoured the boy's mind clean in a nanosecond. It was an absolute truth. It did not brook argument. The fact that the boy's will, amplified by that legacy of energy, had been strong enough to contain it instead of shattering was fascinating. A problem of unique and exquisite complexity. A lesser being would assault the planet. Darkseid's voice rumbled, the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. It was a thought spoken aloud, echoing in the vast, empty throne room. A lesser being would attempt to rip the equation from the boy's flesh. But he was not a lesser being. He understood the nature of the bond. The boy's will was now the vessel. To attack it with brute force would be like trying to retrieve a pearl by shattering the oyster with a sledgehammer. The prize could be damaged, fragmented, perhaps even lost in the ensuing psychic storm. Ripping the equation out would require shattering the boy's will, and a direct assault would only cause the boy to strengthen his defiant, hopeful resolve. It was a self-defeating strategy. No. The container could not be broken from the outside. It had to be corroded from within. The boy's will, his hope, was the cage. Therefore, the boy himself must be made to open the door. He had to be taught the truth. He had to be shown that his hope was a cruel lie, that his efforts to save others only prolonged their suffering, that the chaos of free will was a torment. He had to be placed in situations so painful, so impossible, that the simple, elegant order of the anti-life equation would seem not like a weapon, but like a mercy. He had to be made to want to use it. A cold, thin smile touched the corner of Darkseid's lips. The plan was forming, a beautiful, intricate piece of psychological architecture. This would not be a war of armies and fleets. It would be a war for a single soul. A war of philosophy, waged with suffering as its primary weapon, and for such a war, he would need his most skilled artists. Granny Goodness, he commanded, his voice booming through the palace, carried on unseen channels of power. Decide. Kanto. The air in the throne room shimmered. From 3 separate points before the throne, reality warped and twisted. From the first shimmer emerged a figure of immense, grotesque matriarchy. Granny Goodness was the titan of a woman, her bulk contained within a severe, armored uniform. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face was a terrifying paradox. The indulgent, smiling wrinkles of a beloved grandmother carved around eyes that held the cold, ancient cruelty of a dying star. She held a megarod in one massive hand, its hum a promise of agonizing re-education. She curtsied, a gesture of profound submission that was somehow more menacing than any threat. You called for your humble granny, O great Darkseid, she cooed, her voice a cloying, saccharine sound that was utterly at odds with her monstrous presence. Your sweet little ones on Apocalypse are learning their lessons so well. Their wills are like clay in Granny's loving hands. From the second distortion slunk a smaller, hunched figure, draped in a hooded robe of deepest purple. Darkseid kept his face cowled in shadow, but the long, skeletal fingers that emerged from his sleeves and the glint of hungry, malevolent eyes within the hood were enough. He reeked of the laboratory, of chemicals that induced terror and machines that catalogued pain. He prostrated himself, his body almost flat against the stone floor. Your servant hears and obeys, my lord, Darkseid hissed, his voice slick and sibilant, like the dripping of acid. The symphony of screams from my workshops is a testament to your glory. I live only to study the breaking points of lesser beings for your enlightenment. The third figure did not emerge. He was simply there. Kanto, the master assassin of Apocalypse, stood calmly, a picture of Renaissance elegance amidst the brutalist hellscape. He was clad in a green and gold uniform that seemed more suited to a royal court than a battlefield. His handsome, aquiline features were set in an expression of detached, almost bored amusement. He bowed his head with a fluid grace, a gesture of respect, not of fear. Lord Darkseid, Kanto said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. You honor me. Darkseid surveyed his instruments. The breaker of wills. The master of pain. The artist of death. They were the finest tools in his arsenal for this particular kind of war. A new factor has entered the great equation, Darkseid began, his gaze sweeping over the 3 of them. The final component of the anti-life equation has been secured. However, its acquisition has been complicated. He did not need to elaborate. Using his own power, he projected the knowledge directly into their minds. They saw it all in a dizzying, terrifying instant, the rift, the primitive world, the legacy of power called one for all, and the face of the boy, Izuku Midoriya, his eyes burning with defiant hope. They felt the equation settling within him, and they felt the paradoxical cage of will that now contained it. Granny Goodness's cloying smile widened, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Oh, what a fascinating little dearie! She chirped. Such a strong will. Unbroken. Untrained. So much potential for a proper education. Granny would just love to have him in her orphanage. We'd make him one of my finest furies, yes we would. The integration is unique, Darkseid rasped, rising from his prostration, his mind racing. The host's own energy field, this one for all, acts as a buffer. A protective membrane. The psychic trauma of the bonding alone should have rendered him catatonic. To study the boy's neurological responses as his own hope wars against absolute truth, the data would be exquisite. Kanto remained silent, his expression thoughtful. He tapped a finger against his chin. A cage made of hope, he mused, as if appreciating a fine work of art. To break it, one must therefore demonstrate the futility of hope itself. A delicate, and therefore, interesting, challenge. Your assessments are correct, Darkseid rumbled, pleased with their immediate grasp of the situation. A direct assault is inefficient. The boy must be made to surrender the equation willingly. He must be made to see the truth that it represents. He leaned forward on his throne, the sheer weight of his presence pressing down on them. This is not a mission of conquest. It is a mission of conversion. You will not travel to this earth with armies. You will go as teachers. You will construct a curriculum of suffering designed specifically for Izuku Midoriya, his burning eyes fixed on Darkseid. You, my master of torments. You will not lay a hand on the boy. Instead, you will create chaos he cannot simply punch. You will design threats that prey on the fragility of his world. Plagues with no cure. Disasters with no single source. Problems so complex and overwhelming that his simple, brutish power is rendered useless. You will make him watch as his people suffer, knowing that he is helpless to stop it through conventional means. Darkseid's cowled head bobbed eagerly. A canvas of systemic failure, my lord. The agony of helplessness is a far more refined pain than any mere physical wound. I shall begin at once. Darkseid's gaze shifted to Granny Goodness, her monstrous smile unwavering. Granny. Your domain is the soul. The boy's greatest strength is his compassion, his desire to save the innocent. You will turn that strength into a weapon against him. You will find the ones he cherishes, the children, the weak, the hopeful, and you will corrupt them. You will not harm them physically, you will teach them despair. You will turn them against their savior, make them spit on his ideals. You will force him into choices where saving them means violating their will, and honoring their will means letting them be lost. You will make him see that his love for them is the very source of their pain. Granny Goodness let out a low, guttural chuckle, a sound of pure, maternal sadism. Oh yes, great Darkseid. Granny understands perfectly. We will teach the little hero that the only way to keep his precious lambs safe is to put them in a cage. And he, in his love, will be the one to build it. It will be a beautiful lesson. Finally, Darkseid's eyes settled on Kanto, who had been listening with the detached air of a critic at the opera. Kanto. Your role is the most subtle. You are the artist of futility. When the boy struggles, when he overcomes the obstacles set by Darkseid and Granny, you will be there to undermine his victories. You will show him the pointlessness of his struggle. An assassin does not just end a life, they end a story. You will end his. You will appear when he believes he has won, and you will introduce a new, tragic variable. You will make his every success feel like a greater failure. You will not break his will with pain or despair, but with the elegant, simple truth that his efforts, in the grand scheme, mean nothing at all. Kanto offered a slight, appreciative smile and another graceful bow. To turn a triumph into an epitaph, he said softly. A worthy performance. I accept the role. The three of them stood before their god, a triumvirate of specialized cruelty, their mission clear. They were to be the architects of a single boy's damnation. He already feels the power, Darkseid continued, his voice dropping to a low growl. He has tasted it. The temptation is already a seed in his soul. Your task is to water that seed with a world of tears. Make him believe that the only way to be the hero he so desperately wants to be is to become the tyrant he fears. A boom tube, unbidden, tore open the space behind the three lieutenants. It was a swirling vortex of red and black, a direct gateway to the unsuspecting world of Izuku Midoriya. It hummed with contained power, a silent invitation to begin their terrible work. Go, Darkseid commanded. Break him. Teach him the divine mercy of anti-life. And when he is on his knees, begging for the pain to stop, when he finally speaks the equation not as a weapon but as a prayer, I will be there to hear it. Granny Goodness, her Megarod humming, waddled toward the portal with gleeful anticipation. Darkseid glided after her, a shadow eager to fall upon a new world. Kanto gave one last, courteous nod to his master before turning and walking calmly into the dimensional gateway. The boom tube sealed behind them, leaving Darkseid alone once more in the echoing silence of his throne room. The red glare of the fire pits cast dancing shadows on the walls, but the god tyrant was perfectly still. He could still feel it, across the void. The faintest sensation. The anti-life equation, his ultimate truth, was being held at bay. But what was holding it? It was more than just the boy's will. It was that legacy of power, the one for all. It felt like a collection of defiant whispers, a chorus of ghosts all screaming the same foolish word, choose. Darkseid almost laughed. He had felt such concepts before. Life. Hope. Choice. They were fleeting, chaotic sparks in the grand, ordered darkness of the cosmos. They were temporary aberrations, statistical noise. They were beautiful in their tragic, fleeting passion, but ultimately, they were insignificant. He settled back into his throne, his gaze unwavering, his patience as vast and as cold as the space between galaxies. The boy could have his hope. He could have his ghosts. He could have his defiant will. They were all just variables in a much larger, much grander equation. An equation that had only one possible solution. Darkseid is. A week of fragile peace settled over Muzurifu. It was the peace of a city holding its breath, the quiet of a wound not yet healed. Reconstruction crews worked tirelessly, their cranes and power tools a constant, grinding hum that replaced the sounds of battle. Citizens, weary but resilient, began the slow, arduous process of reclaiming their lives from the rubble. For the students of UA, it was a return to a strained and surreal normalcy. Classes resumed, training exercises were scheduled, and the faculty did their best to project an aura of control and confidence. But for Izuku Midoriya, there was no peace. There was only the quiet, unrelenting hum of the equation in his soul. He existed in a state of hypervigilance, a prisoner in his own mind. Every conversation was a tightrope walk over a chasm of absolute control. He measured every word, censored every thought, terrified that a stray desire or a flicker of frustration would ripple out and unmake the will of someone around him. His notebooks, once filled with frantic, joyful analysis of quirks, were now filled with page after page of a single, looping mantra: my thoughts are my own. My will is my own. He built a wall around himself, brick by painful brick. He ate his meals alone. He found excuses to skip group training sessions, opting for grueling solo workouts in Gym Gamma where his only company was the shattering of concrete pillars and the screaming of his own muscles. The pain was a welcome distraction, a physical reality he could control, unlike the formless, terrifying power coiled within him. His friends, bless them, tried to break through. Uraraka would approach him with a gentle smile and an offer to walk back to the dorms, only to be met with a hasty, mumbled excuse and a quick retreat. Ida would attempt to engage him in a discussion about class schedules, his chopping hand motions faltering as Deku gave him terse, one-word answers without making eye contact. Todoroki would simply sit near him in the common room, a silent, stoic presence that was somehow the most comforting and the most painful of all, a quiet acknowledgement that something was deeply wrong. Only Bakugo kept his distance. Since that day in Deku's room, a strange, unspoken truce had formed between them. There were no more explosive confrontations, no more taunts or challenges. Instead, there were furtive, haunted glances across the classroom. Bakugo would watch him, his red eyes narrowed not with anger, but with a wary, fearful confusion. He was a man who had glimpsed the abyss, and now he couldn't stop looking for its reflection in the eyes of the person who had shown it to him. All Might was his only confidant, his only release valve. They met nightly in the teacher's lounge, the conversations hushed and desperate. Toshinori, for his part, was trying. He'd reached out to old contacts, to specialists in psychic quirks, even to international hero organizations, searching for anything, anyone, who had ever encountered a power like this. The answer was always the same, a resounding, terrifying silence. This was beyond the scope of their world. It's the temptation that's the worst, Deku admitted one night, his voice barely a whisper as he stared into a cup of cold tea. It's always there. In class, when someone is struggling with a concept, there's this whisper. You could make them understand. During training, when I see someone about to get hit, it's there. You could make them dodge. It offers the perfect solution to every problem, and the only price is everything. Toshinori could only offer his presence, his unwavering belief in the boy's strength of character. Resisting it is the victory, my boy, he said, his voice heavy. Every time you choose not to use it, you are proving it wrong. But Deku was so tired of fighting. He was a hero. His entire being was geared towards solving problems, saving people, and making things better. To have the ultimate problem-solving tool at his disposal and be forced to never, ever use it was a unique and exquisite form of torture. It was like dying of thirst while holding a glass of water you knew was poisoned. The test, when it came, did not announce itself with a boom tube or a cosmic proclamation. It began with a scream. It was a Tuesday afternoon. A fine, gray drizzle was falling over the city, slicking the half-repaired streets. An alarm klaxon, a sound that had become sickeningly familiar, blared across the UA campus. Aizawa's voice, flat and urgent, crackled over the school's intercom. All Hero Course students, report to your homerooms. This is not a drill. A Level A villain threat has been identified in the Takanawa district. Pro-heroes are on the scene. Stay within the school's barrier. The Takanawa district. It was one of the areas hit hardest during the battle, a sprawling commercial zone now dominated by skeletal skyscrapers and debris-choked streets. A perfect hunting ground. From the window of the Heights Alliance common room, they could see the smoke. It was a thick, greasy black pillar rising into the gray sky, stark and ominous. Deku felt his danger sense flare, not as a sharp spike, but as a low, throbbing ache, a persistent hum of impending catastrophe. Of course, the students of Class 1A were not content to sit and watch. Within minutes, they were clustered around a tablet, watching a live news feed from a helicopter circling the scene. The footage was shaky and chaotic. A monster was rampaging through the ruins. It was a Nomu, but it was unlike any they had ever seen before. It was not the brutish, bird-beaked creature from the USJ, nor the sleek, intelligent hyena that had plagued Endeavor. This thing was a biological horror, an abomination of raw, twitching flesh. It was a vaguely humanoid mountain of gray, tumorous muscle, standing at least 50 feet tall. It had no discernible head, only a pulsating, fleshy core where a chest should be. Dozens of limbs, some ending in razor-sharp talons, others in meaty, club-like fists, sprouted from its body at random, unnatural angles. What is that thing? Ciro breathed, his face pale. Its regeneration is off the charts, Yayorosa murmured, her eyes narrowed in analysis. Look, she pointed to the screen. Endeavor, a blazing comet of righteous fury, streaked across the sky and unleashed a devastating jet burn, a concentrated blast of plasma that struck the Nomu square in its central mass. The creature was engulfed in a miniature sun. For a moment, it was completely immolated, its flesh vaporizing in the intense heat. But then, the fire cleared. The hole in the Noma's chest, bigger than a city bus, was already closing. Gray, cancerous flesh bubbled and writhed, knitting itself back together at a visible, sickening rate. Within 5 seconds the wound was gone, leaving no scar, no sign of damage. The creature didn't even seem to have noticed the attack. It regenerates faster than it can be destroyed, Todoroki stated, his voice grim. He knew the limits of fire-based attacks, and he was watching the world's most powerful flame quirk rendered completely ineffective. The Nomu continued its rampage. It wasn't fast, but it was relentless. It moved with a slow, inexorable purpose, each step crushing buildings, each swing of its mismatched limbs leveling entire city blocks. It wasn't targeting people specifically. It was simply destroying everything in its path, an engine of pure, mindless destruction. The pro-heroes on the scene were like gnats buzzing around a behemoth. Best genus fiber cables, strong enough to restrain giants, snapped like thread against its hide. Ryukyu, in her dragon form, was swatted out of the sky and crashed through the shell of a department store. Hawk's feathers, which could strike with the speed and precision of bullets, simply embedded themselves harmlessly in its regenerating flesh before being pushed out. They were saving people, evacuating the remaining civilians and rescue workers with frantic efficiency, but they couldn't stop the monster. They couldn't even slow it down. Deku watched, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. He could feel it. The helplessness. The rising tide of panic. The city was bleeding, and its mightiest defenders were failing, and the equation whispered, "Look at them. They struggle. They fight. They risk their lives against the inevitable. It is chaos. It is pointless suffering. You see the damage it causes. The futility. He shook his head, trying to clear the insidious thought. They're heroes. They never give up, he countered, his own inner voice feeling weak and reedy. And they will die for that foolishness, the equation replied, its logic as cold and sharp as glass. The city will fall. More will suffer, all because their pride and their hope prevent them from seeing the simple, logical solution. The news helicopter suddenly lurched, the camera spinning wildly. One of the Noma's flailing appendages had swiped near it. When the view stabilized, it was focused on a new horror. The Noma was lumbering towards the wreckage of the Takanawa General Hospital. The building had been evacuated, but a triage center, a sprawling tent city filled with injured civilians and overworked medics from the last battle, had been set up in its shadow. Hundreds of people, many of them unable to move, lay helpless in its path. Endeavor, seeing the new target, let out a roar of fury that was audible even over the news feed's audio. He pushed his quirk to its absolute limit, becoming a living star, and slammed into the Noma again. The resulting explosion was immense, a prominence burn that lit up the entire district. But it was no use. The Noma stumbled, its advance barely checked, its flesh already bubbling and reforming. The heroes were not going to make it. They were not going to be able to stop it in time. No, Uraraka whispered, her hands flying to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. All those people. Deku felt a cold dread seize him. He saw it all playing out in his mind, the creature's massive foot crushing the tents, the screams, the pointless, preventable end of hundreds of lives. He saw the faces of the heroes, their expressions of failure and anguish. He saw another tragedy scarring his city, his world, and he had the power to stop it. Right here, right now. A word. A single word was all it would take. Their lives are in your hands, the equation pressed, its voice no longer a whisper but a resonant, compelling truth. You can stop this. No more pain. No more suffering. You can save them all. Isn't that what a hero does? A hero saves people. Do it. Just say the word. Make it stop. The logic was flawless. The temptation was absolute. What was the will of one mindless monster compared to the lives of hundreds of innocent people? It wasn't even a choice. It was a duty. To stand by and do nothing when he had this power. Wasn't that the greater evil? To let them die for the sake of a principle? His mentor's words echoed in his mind. Resisting it is the victory. But as he looked at the screen, at the terrified faces of the medics trying to drag patients out of the way, at the inexorable advance of the monster, Tashinori's words felt hollow. What victory was there in standing by and watching people die? What principle was worth that price? The wall he had so carefully built around his power crumbled. The dam of his resolve broke. The hero inside him, the boy who had thrown himself at a sludge monster without a quirk, screamed that he had to do something. He pushed himself away from the table, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. His classmates turned to look at him, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Midoriya? Ida asked, but Deku didn't hear him. He was walking towards the balcony, his movements stiff, robotic. His mind was a vortex of conflicting ideals, but one was rising to the top, screaming for dominance. Save them. He stepped out into the cold drizzle, the wind whipping at his uniform. He could see the monster in the distance, a gray, cancerous blot on the horizon. He could feel the vibrations of its footsteps through the soles of his shoes. He could feel the terror of the people in its path, a psychic scream that resonated with the fear he had felt his entire life. He took a deep breath. He didn't focus one for all. He didn't feel the familiar crackle of green lightning. He focused on the cold, silent power within him. He reached out with his will, not with his fists. He focused on the Nomu, on the chaotic, mindless engine of destruction. He felt for the spark of whatever passed for a consciousness within it, a simple, biological imperative to destroy, and he imposed his will upon it. He spoke. His voice was not a shout. It was calm, measured, and carried an unnatural weight, the authority of a fundamental law of the universe. The drizzle seemed to quiet. The wind seemed to still. For a moment, it felt as if the entire world was listening. Atone. The effect was not broadcast on the news. It could not be captured by a camera lens. It was a change on a level deeper than physics. On the television in the common room, the students of 1A watched in stunned silence. The Nomu, which had been raising a massive, clawed foot to crush the triage center, suddenly froze. Its entire 50-foot frame went rigid, its advance halted a mere 20 yards from the first tent. The pro-heroes stopped their assault, confused. Endeavor hovered in the air, his flames flickering, unsure of what had just happened. Then, the Nomu began to tremble. A low, guttural moan emanated from its central mass, a sound that was not one of mindless rage, but of something else. It was a sound of dawning, horrifying awareness. Deku, from his vantage point on the balcony, saw it all with a terrifying clarity his classmates couldn't. He had not commanded the Nomu to stop. He had not commanded it to die. He had given it a single, terrible concept, atonement. And the equation had made that concept its entire reality. The mindless creature, a being of pure, destructive impulse, was suddenly flooded with a perfect and complete understanding of every iota of pain, fear, and suffering it had caused. It was granted a soul for the sole purpose of being tormented by it. It was made to feel the grief of the families whose homes it had crushed, the terror of the people it had nearly killed, the violation of the city it had scarred. It was a consciousness born into a state of absolute, unforgivable guilt. The Nomu's limbs, which had been weapons of destruction, now turned inward. Talons designed to tear through steel now raked across its own flesh, gouging out massive furrows. Club-like fists hammered against its own pulsating core. It began to tear itself apart, a grotesque, horrifying act of self-punishment. Its mindless shrieks were replaced by something that sounded disturbingly like expressions of agony, of a being desperate to undo its own existence. It was trying to destroy the source of its sin, itself. Its regeneration fought back. As soon as it tore a wound in its own body, the flesh bubbled and tried to heal. But the creature's divinely inspired self-loathing was stronger. It ripped and tore and smashed at itself with a frenzy born of pure, cosmic guilt, overwhelming its own ability to heal. Back in the common room, his classmates were staring at the screen, their initial relief turning to confusion and horror. "What is it doing?" Kirishima asked, his voice strained. It's killing itself. "This is unnatural," Tokoyami whispered, dark shadow shrinking back into his body. But Deku could not look away. He had done it. He had saved them. Hundreds of people were alive because of him. The triage center was safe. The heroes were safe. The city was safe. This was a victory. So why did it feel like he had just committed a crime against nature? The equation was silent now, sated. It did not gloat. It simply presented the facts. The threat is neutralized. The people are safe. The outcome is optimal. This is the power of true order. He had won. He had used the power, and it had worked perfectly. He had saved everyone. He turned from the balcony and walked back into the common room. The drizzle had plastered his hair to his forehead, and his face was pale, his expression unreadable. His classmates all turned to look at him, their eyes wide with questions. He ignored them, his gaze finding the television screen. The camera zoomed in on the scene. The Nomu was a twitching, dying heap, having successfully destroyed its own core. The immediate danger was over. The camera panned across the faces of the pro-heroes on the ground. They were not celebrating. They were staring at the remains of the monster, their expressions a mixture of relief, profound confusion, and a deep, instinctual fear. They were looking at the aftermath of a power they did not understand, a force that had not defeated the enemy, but had turned it into an instrument of its own horrifying execution. This was not a victory fought and earned through strength and perseverance. It was an exorcism. A dark miracle. And the heroes on the ground could feel it. They could sense the wrongness of it in the very air. Deku met Endeavor's eyes through the television screen. The number one hero, his flames extinguished, looked up, his gaze sweeping the surrounding buildings, as if searching for the source of this terrible, unseen power. Searching for the god who had just passed judgment. A cold certainty settled in Deku's stomach. He had saved them. He had done what a hero was supposed to do. But in that moment, seeing the fear and awe on the faces of the heroes he admired, he knew he had just crossed the line. And he was terrifyingly aware that he didn't know how to get back. He had taken his first real taste of the equation's salvation, and a part of him, a part he loathed, had found it to be terrifyingly sweet. The aftermath of the Takanawa incident was quiet. Eerily so. There were no victory parades, no triumphant press conferences. The official report, released by the Hero Public Safety Commission, was a masterpiece of obfuscation. It stated that the Nomu, designated regenerator, had possessed a previously unknown psychological feedback quirk that caused it to self-destruct under extreme stress. The pro-hero's coordinated assault, the report concluded, had triggered this unforeseen flaw, neutralizing the threat. It was a neat, tidy, and utterly unbelievable lie. No one in the upper echelons of the hero world believed it for a second. They had all seen the footage. They had all heard the eyewitness accounts from the heroes on the ground. A creature of mindless instinct doesn't suddenly develop a conscience and commit a ritualistic, agonizing suicide. Something else had intervened. A power of terrifying scope and unknown origin had simply ended the fight. And the only variable, the only truly unknown factor in the hero world these days, was the quiet, troubled successor to All Might. At UA, a meeting was convened in Principal Nizu's office. The room, usually a place of calm intellectualism, was thick with tension. Nizu, the hyper-intelligent chimera, sat behind his desk, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of profound, calculating gravity. His paws were steepled before him, his black eyes fixed on the man sitting opposite. All Might, in his skeletal form, looked older and more worn than ever, the weight of his student's secret pressing down on him. Standing by the window, his arms crossed and his capture weapon hanging loosely, was Shota Aizawa. His expression was a thundercloud of suspicion and exhaustion. "He won't talk about it," Aizawa said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He didn't need to specify who he was. Midoriya has been a model student since the incident. Quiet. Diligent. But he's a ghost. He trains until he collapses, he avoids his classmates, and whenever I try to engage him, he gives me one-word answers and finds the first opportunity to flee. It's not logical. It's the behavior of someone hiding something. He is carrying a heavy burden, Aizawa, Toshinori said, his voice heavy with a weariness that went beyond physical ailment. It was the weariness of a man keeping a universe-ending secret. "We all are," Aizawa retorted, turning from the window. His gaze was sharp, accusatory. "But this is different. I was monitoring the situation from the command center. The heroes on the ground reported a presence. A feeling of overwhelming authority that descended just before the Nomu turned on itself. Endeavor himself said it felt like the voice of God. And then there's the timing. The moment the monster freezes is the exact moment Midoriya walks out onto the dorm balcony. A coincidence? I stopped believing in coincidences after the fifth villain attack on my class." Nizu finally spoke, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. The power that destroyed that Nomu was not one of physical force. It was one of conceptual force. It didn't just stop the creature, it rewrote its very nature, instilling a concept, guilt, atonement, self-loathing, where none existed before. This is, for lack of a better term, reality manipulation on a psychological level. It is a power that frightens me more than all for one's entire arsenal. He looked directly at Toshinori, his intelligent eyes missing nothing. "You know what it is, don't you, All Might? This is connected to the incident during the Kamino battle. The portal, the being that came through it. This power is not of our world." Toshinori's shoulders slumped. The lie was too heavy to carry in this room, with these men. He took a deep, rattling breath and began to speak. He didn't tell them everything. He omitted the name of Darkseid and the true cosmic scale of the equation, framing it as an alien power, a psychic contagion that had bonded with his successor. But he told them the truth of its function, the ability to override free will, to impose one's intent upon reality itself. When he finished, the silence in the office was absolute. Aizawa looked as if he'd been punched in the gut, his already cynical worldview shattered and reassembled into something far darker. Nizu's fur was standing on end, his usual analytical gleam replaced by something that looked unnervingly like fear, to control the will of others. Nisa whispered, the implications blooming in his vast intellect like a field of poison flowers. The potential for misuse is absolute. The potential for good is equally absolute, and equally terrifying. A villain who never chose to be a villain could be commanded to be good. A society without crime, without dissent, without pain, achieved through the complete annihilation of choice. He shuddered. It is the ultimate philosophical poison. Aizawa's fists were clenched. He used it, he said, the words like stones. He stands on a balcony miles away and uses a power that erases free will to end a fight. He didn't consult anyone. He didn't ask for permission. He just acted. He saved hundreds of lives. Toshinori countered, his voice rising. He was faced with an impossible choice, and he chose to save people. That is the heart of a hero. The heart of a hero doesn't make him immune to the corruption of a power like that. Aizawa shot back, his eyes flashing. Power needs to be checked. It needs limits. What limit is there on a boy who can make anyone do anything he wants just by speaking? We are putting the fate of the world in the hands of a teenager's emotional stability. And right now, that teenager is isolating himself and showing clear signs of extreme psychological distress. It's illogical and it is dangerously irresponsible. So what do you propose, Shota? Nisa asked, his voice cutting through the argument. That we lock him away? Treat him like a weapon or a prisoner? He is still your student. He is still a boy. Aizawa's shoulders sagged. He ran a hand through his messy black hair, his expression conflicted. I don't know, he admitted, his voice dropping. But I will be watching him. Every moment. One more illogical use of that power, one more step down that path, and I will intervene. I will erase his power, even if it's just for a moment, and I will restrain him. I will not let my student become a tyrant, no matter how benevolent his intentions are. The meeting ended without a solution, only a fragile, tense understanding. Aizawa would be the warden. Nisa would be the strategist, searching for a countermeasure to a power he could barely comprehend. And All Might would be the mentor, desperately trying to hold his successor's soul together. The three most powerful figures at UA were now united, not in their trust of Deku, but in their shared fear of what he was becoming. The cracks, however, were not just forming in the halls of power. They were spreading through the foundations of Deku's friendships, silent, hairline fractures that threatened to bring the whole structure of his life crashing down. He felt their eyes on him constantly. In the common room, the chatter would dip for a fraction of a second when he entered. During class, he could feel their gazes on the back of his neck. They were worried, they were confused. And a small, growing part of them was afraid. Achiko Uraraka was a creature of empathy. She felt the emotions of others like changes in atmospheric pressure. And the pressure around Izuku had become a crushing, low-level storm front. He was her closest friend, the boy whose fierce determination had inspired her from the very first day. Seeing him so distant, so haunted, was a physical ache in her chest. She decided she couldn't stand it anymore. She found him one evening on the rooftop of the dorms, a place that had once been their spot for quiet conversations. He was standing at the railing, staring out at the glittering lights of the recovering city, his shoulders hunched as if against a cold wind that only he could feel. Deku? She said softly, her voice startling him. He jumped, spinning around. For a split second, she saw a raw, unfiltered panic in his eyes, a look of such profound fear that it made her take a step back. Then, the mask of weary detachment slammed back into place. Oh hey Uraraka, he mumbled, turning back to the railing. Just getting some air. You've been getting a lot of air lately, she said, trying for a light tone, but her voice wavered. She moved to stand beside him, leaving a careful foot of space between them. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. We're all worried about you, she finally said. After the Nomu attack, you've been different. If something's wrong, you know you can talk to us. You can talk to me. He remained silent, his knuckles white on the railing. He was at war with himself. A part of him, the lonely, terrified boy inside, screamed to tell her everything, to let her in, to share the impossible burden. But the equation was a cold presence, and it showed him the consequences. It projected a horrifying image into his mind, Uraraka's kind, expressive face going slack, her bright, determined eyes turning vacant, all because he might wish for her to understand or not worry. The thought of imposing that emptiness on her, of all people, was a violation he couldn't even begin to contemplate. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice flat. "I'm just tired." "Tired?" "Deku, you look like you haven't slept in a week," she pressed, her concern overriding her caution. She reached out, her hand hovering, wanting to put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Please, just tell me what's going on. I want to help." As her fingers brushed against the fabric of his sleeve, he flinched back as if he'd been burned. He recoiled so violently that he stumbled backward, his eyes wide with that same primal panic she'd seen moments before. "Don't." The word was sharper, harsher than he intended. Uraraka froze, her hands still outstretched in the empty air between them. The hurt on her face was immediate and palpable. It was as if he had slapped her. Her eyes glistened. I'm sorry," she stammered, pulling her hand back as if it were the offending object. "I didn't mean to." "No, it's not you," he said quickly, his voice filled with self-loathing. He couldn't look at her. "I'm sorry. I can't right now. Please, just leave me alone." Each word was a dagger he was forced to throw. He watched her hopeful expression crumble, replaced by a mask of deep, confused pain. She nodded once, a small, jerky motion, a silent admission of defeat. She turned and walked away without another word, her footsteps echoing on the rooftop, each one a hammer blow against his heart. He waited until she was gone before he sank to his knees, pressing his forehead against the cold metal railing. The equation was silent, but he could feel its cold approval. Alienation. Loneliness. These are the component parts. You are learning the math. Tenya approached the problem of Midoriya with the same methodical, structured logic he applied to everything in his life. He observed the subject's deviation from normal behavior, social withdrawal, decreased verbal communication, signs of sleep deprivation. He formulated a hypothesis. Midoriya was suffering from post-traumatic stress compounded by performance anxiety. He developed a multi-step plan for intervention. He cornered Deku after class, his arm chopping the air with earnest precision. "Midoriya, my friend. I must have a word," he announced, effectively blocking the doorway. "I have observed your recent melancholy and have concluded that your current regimen is insufficient for proper mental and emotional recovery. Therefore, I have taken the liberty of drafting a proposed schedule for you." He unfurled a meticulously detailed chart, complete with color-coded time slots for mandatory group socialization, guided meditation sessions, led by Ida, of course, and scheduled worry-sharing appointments. Deku stared at the chart, his mind reeling. Ida's intentions were so pure, so incredibly, painfully earnest. He was trying to fix a broken soul with a timetable. It was like trying to patch a black hole with duct tape. Deku wanted to laugh, he wanted to cry, he wanted to scream that his problem couldn't be solved with color-coded blocks of time. "I appreciate this," Deku said, the words feeling like sandpaper in his throat. "But it's not going to work." "Nonsense," Ida declared, his conviction unshaken. "A structured approach is the cornerstone of overcoming any obstacle. We simply need to apply the principles of heroic efficiency to your psychological well-being. We will begin this evening at 1900 hours with a team-building board game." Deku felt a surge of claustrophobic panic. The idea of being trapped in a room with his friends, forced to interact, to speak, to potentially think a stray thought that would make them all perfectly compliant game players. It was a nightmare. "I just wish you'd leave it alone," the thought flared, hot and desperate. He immediately clamped down on it, a wave of cold sweat washing over him. He felt a faint, terrifying echo of his power ripple outwards before he suppressed it. For a fraction of a second, Ida's energetic chopping motion faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, his train of thought momentarily derailed. He blinked, then recovered, though his momentum was lost. "That is, as I was saying, structure is key," he finished, his tone slightly less certain. Deku saw that flicker, that momentary lapse. It was the same blankness he'd seen in the cafeteria. He had almost done it. He had almost imposed his will on Ida, one of his best friends. "I can't," Deku said, his voice cracking. He shoved past Ida, not even bothering to look at the hurt and confusion on his friend's face. "I'm sorry, I just can't." He fled down the hallway, leaving Ida standing alone, his perfect schedule clutched in his hand, a useless blueprint for a problem he couldn't begin to comprehend. Ida, a boy who believed every problem had a logical solution, had just been confronted with a chaos that defied all his rules. The crack in their friendship was one of pure, frustrating incomprehension. Todoroki. Shoto Todoroki was a student of trauma. He had grown up in a house where a good man had been warped by a hunger for power, where love and abuse were tangled together like thorny vines. He recognized the signs in Deku not as weakness or sadness, but as the quiet, dangerous pressure of a power that was consuming its wielder from the inside out. He didn't see a friend who was pulling away. He saw a boy building a cage around himself, terrified of what was inside. He didn't press. He didn't offer schedules or demand explanations. He simply appeared. He'd sit at the other end of the couch where Deku was trying to be invisible. He'd choose the weight bench next to Deku's in the gym, their workout proceeding in a shared, heavy silence punctuated only by the clank of metal. His moment came late one night. Deku was in the communal kitchen, unable to sleep again, staring into the refrigerator as if the answers were hidden behind the milk carton. Todoroki entered, getting a glass of water. They stood in the quiet hum of the appliances, the darkness of the dorm a comfortable shroud. "When I was younger," Todoroki said, his voice a low murmur that didn't break the quiet, "I hated my fire. I saw it as his power. A curse. Something that would only hurt people. It felt separate from me. A monster I was chained to." Deku tensed, but he didn't run. He closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it, his head bowed. "I thought that by refusing to use it, I was controlling it," Todoroki continued, his gaze distant, focused on the reflection in the dark kitchen window. "But I wasn't. It was controlling me. My hatred of it was defining me, just as much as his ambition defined him. It was you, during the sports festival, who made me see that it was my power. My choice." He turned his head, his heterochromatic eyes finding Deku in the dim light. There was no judgment in his gaze, no fear. Only a deep, resonant understanding. "I don't know what happened to you in that battle, Midoriya. And you don't have to tell me. But I know what it looks like when someone is fighting their own power." He took a step closer, his voice dropping even lower. "Whatever it is, don't let it become you. Don't let your fear of it be the thing that defines you. It is your power. You have to be the one to choose." Of all the things his friends had said, of all the attempts to reach him, Todoroki's quiet words were what finally broke through. Because he wasn't trying to fix the problem. He was acknowledging the fight. Tears welled in Deku's eyes, hot and sudden. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of connection, a sense that he wasn't entirely alone on this horrifying, isolated island. But the moment was fleeting. The equation, which had been silent, stirred at this intrusion of hope. It offered a cold, logical rebuttal. His father was a flawed man. Darkseid is a god. His struggle was with his past. Yours is with the fundamental nature of reality. He does not, and cannot understand. The cold logic snuffed out the small, warm flicker of hope. Todoroki saw the shift in Deku's eyes, the brief moment of connection being overwritten by that familiar, haunted emptiness. "Thank you, Todoroki," Deku whispered, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. He pushed himself off the refrigerator. I need to go." He left Todoroki standing alone in the dark kitchen, the gap between them now wider than ever. It wasn't a crack of fear or misunderstanding, but one of scale. Todoroki had offered him a handhold, a common ground of shared experience, but Deku now knew that he was standing on a precipice so high that his friend's world was just a speck in the distance. And that was the most profound loneliness of all. The cracks were spreading, isolating him, cutting him off from the very people who were his reason for fighting. Each severed connection, each moment of alienation, was a small victory for the cold truth that waited patiently inside him, a truth that was beginning to feel less like a prison and more like an inevitability.